Join us on the starship Earth and reconnect with the science of the land and stars. From the depth of the oceans to the top of the cedars and beyond the galaxy. Portals and ceremonies, gravitational waves, caribou, highways, laughter as medicine, quantum entanglement, glacier, sovereignty, hunting, mathematics, berries, fire, crocus teachings, star people and Pleiades, grandmother, moon. Tellings from Stones to Stars on the Ancestral Science podcast, a place to learn the sciences of the 7 directions.
Well, welcome back to the Ancestral Science podcast. My name is Corey. I'll be your host and guide on this journey where we together learn more about the depth of science from stones to stars, or as we like to call it here, the OG science. So we were thinking, it's been a bit of a cortisol-inducing year, and with the holidays coming up, we thought maybe relaunching a mindfulness episode might be helpful for everyone, including us. So how about we reconnect with body, brain, and DNA, and even the land, with a mindfulness episode of the Ancestral Science podcast with Dr. Michael Yellowbird. This episode was recorded in November of 2024 on a mild, wintry morning here on the lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Tsuut'ina Nation, Îethka Nakoda First Nation, and more recently, the Otipemisiwak Métis. The Ancestral Science podcast got to learn from Dr. Yellowbird by beginning first with a guided meditation to ground ourselves and focus on the present, and then we explored a mathematical equation for decolonization. We talked about how Auntie jokes can protect the brain, the effects of colonization on our bodies and our brains, the smell of bacon and well-being, mindfulness and systemic racism, and ancestral eating. So, always appreciate it if you want to take a moment to like, share, follow, and rate. You can check out the show notes here below for some unique Indigenous science merch. And there's a lot of educational resources as well that are linked below in the show notes. Again, thanks to Emil Starlight for the seamless editing, videography, and audio, Alex for pod support and marketing, and as well, Walter Whitebear, Sharon Foster, and Emil for that amazing opening tune. So, why don't you get comfy with your favorite blanket or meditation pillow? Maybe go hang out next to a houseplant or a window to connect with the sky and open up all of your senses and your heart to wellness teachings from Dr. Michael Yellowbird. Okay, well, welcome to the Ancestral Science podcast. We're so grateful today to welcome Dr. Michael Yellowbird and share this space here today. But first, protocols. I have some tobacco here to offer if you'll accept it for your time and your space and your wisdom that you'll share today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Corey.
Okay. And a reminder to listeners with protocols that any knowledge that's shared here on this podcast is not mine. It's not Ancestral Science podcast, but it's always connected to the knowledge keeper and the community that they're from. So when you hear something cool here, make sure you connect it to the person and the land that they're from. So with that, I'm going to offer space for Michael to introduce yourself in your own way.
Well, thanks so much, Corey. My name is Michael Yellowbird. My community knows me as Nationanu Dewadanan, which in my language means chief among many. I'm a member of the 3 affiliated tribes from North Dakota, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes. And our history has been one where we traded with a lot of tribes in the Midwest, and we were agricultural tribes, for many for many, many years, I guess, probably a few hundreds of years. And so a lot of the things that we did down in our part of the world were trading, and a lot of different nations came to trade with us because we grew some pretty amazing vegetables like corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, watermelons, a lot of different kinds of plants. And so a lot of tribes came from all over the place to trade with us, to trade horses, guns, cloth, material, pelts, and just came to hang out and visit with us, and cook and eat and do games. So it was where we lived was kind of what I call an indigenous Silk Road. A lot of different movement, across Turtle Island coming to our part of the territory. And that was true about a lot of trading centers, pre-Columbian trading centers in Turtle Island. A lot of movement on Turtle Island. People don't realize, I don't think people realize that there was such an economy, such a huge amount of trade routes, such a huge amount of interaction between groups for long periods of time. So that's who we are as tribes. And I'm now on Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba. I'm the former dean of the Faculty of Social Work, and I'm also a professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. I've had appointments at a number of different universities in Canada and the US. My first position was at the University of British Columbia. I was there in the School of Social Work, and then I moved from there to the University of Kansas. And then from there, I was at Arizona State in the School of Social Work for a while, and then back to Kansas, where I was heading a large Indigenous Studies program, and I was appointed as an American Studies professor and a university professor at that time. And then I spent a few years out in Northern California at Humboldt State University, which is now Cal Poly Humboldt. Then back to North Dakota. I came back to North Dakota when my mother was ill and not feeling well, so I came back to help with her care. And then ended up coming up here to the University of Manitoba for a dean's position. So I've been here since 2019. Most of my career I've spent focusing on Indigenous people. My background is in health. I did the first, I think the only national study of Indigenous health use and behavior in the United States, which is a huge national study. And that's what my background is in health. So more recently, I've been spending a lot of time looking at contemplative science, ancestral health, ancestral well-being, and those kinds of things. So just I'll cut it short there, leave it at that. So
cut it short. It's like the tour of Turtle Island where you've lived. All the places you've influenced. It's fantastic. Thank you. You had mentioned that maybe we can start out, we start out in a good way with tobacco and grounding ourselves. Do you want to start us off also in a good way with the little maybe guided meditations if we can all?
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, meditation. I've been teaching meditation for many years, and it's always a pleasure for me to be asked to do that. So thank you. So for those of you who are listening out there, thank you for being part of the audience today. And I want to invite you just to take a moment to settle into your chairs or whatever you're doing, standing or you're laying down or whatever it is, just to relax into a place of calm and a place of peace. And if it feels comfortable to you, to close your eyes, as long as you're not driving, and begin to just relax your body. Just for the first time now, maybe of the day or the night, whatever time you're listening to this, is to just begin to breathe and notice that you have breath. Notice that your breath of life is bringing a sense of calm and relaxation to your body. And maybe you are sensing now where you feel it the most. Maybe you feel it in your belly as you breathe in and your belly rises and you breathe out. Your belly expands and it falls with the in-breath. Rising, falling. Feeling a sense of well-being as you're in your space of safety. Feeling a sense of awareness and calm. And just noticing your body and how your body feels at this moment. Noticing your emotions, but not getting taken away by them. Noticing the feelings in your body and your mind. Also just noticing. And then maybe any memories or any thoughts about the past or the future in the present moment that are coming up. Just acknowledging them, not trying to change them in any way, but just acknowledging and then returning back to your breath. And a nice deep in-breath, pausing, nice deep out-breath. And as you're breathing in, letting all the air out first, and then breathing in, 2, 3, 4, pausing, breathing out, 2, 3, 4, just a gentle pause. And again, breathing in, 2, 3, 4, and breathing out, 2, 3, 4. And just notice how your shoulders rise as you take that nice deep in-breath, how your body just sort of stabilizes. And as you breathe out, notice how your body just sort of falls just gently forward. Your shoulders fall forward just a bit as you're letting out all the air in your exhale. And just follow this pattern just for a moment, breathing in. And as you breathe in, give yourself permission to feel the wonder of this breath, the miracle of this breath coming into your body, circulating. And on the out breath, the same thing. Just feeling your emotions in your body and sense of wellness. And just remembering that the health of your lungs would allow you to take these nice deep breaths. And healthy lungs are a nice, really strong indicator of longevity and well-being. So you want to make sure that your breath is, you're taking nice, deep in-breaths, calming out breaths. And if you have any breathing problems, I encourage you not to push yourself too much, but just allow yourself to relax and take in as much air as you can and as much air as you can let out, but just keeping it even, just maintaining a sense of awareness of your breath. And I want you to take this feeling of this sense of calm and the sense of being with your breath and recognizing, acknowledging your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, your memories is all part of who you are and what you embody in this life. And allowing your brain, and your body, and your mind just to purify your thoughts and your feelings to bring a sense of calm to you whenever you need this sense of calm. And one more deep breath in, one deep breath out, last one in, just relaxing, breathing in, pausing, a nice relaxed breath out, and just calming, feeling your body once more, where you're sitting, where you're standing or laying, and gently open your eyes, coming back to the awareness of the space that you're in.
I needed that. I
Oh,
appreciate
good.
you mentioning. Please, if you're, don't close your eyes if you're driving. That's a great point. Oh, you just do that. Okay, thank you so much for your time here today. Oh, I need to do that more often. Do you meditate every day?
I do. Yep. Every day and several times through the day. Short meditations, what I call like meditation bites, meditation snacks.
Ah, ooh,
So
meditation snacks. I'm gonna write that down. I like that.
yeah,
Like
just like every hour, I just set my watch and uh, I get up and move whenever for every 45 minutes. I get out of my desk and move for about 5 minutes, walk, stretch. And then every hour I spend at least 3 to 5 minutes just breathing really deeply and just meditating on the moment that I'm in, checking in with my body and just allowing myself just to kind of decompress and sort of just like catching your breath again. And then before I kind of dive back into my work again. So it's like swimming laps in the pool. You swim so much, then you come up, take a nice deep breath, then you go again. So
yeah. It's like that, being aware of the moment. Because, it's, I think anyone that's super busy, you're always thinking of the future, all the stuff that you have to do either later today or next week or whatnot. But that time to just think about, your breath and your air and your body and your thoughts right now. It's really important. Thank you so much for that. Okay, we're ready. So first question of what I always ask all of the guests is, what is science to you?
Well, science to me, I think, is what human beings have always done, no matter what time of the evolutionary time period it's been, up to the modern time. And the idea is that it's a lot to do with the scientific method, and the scientific method is not really owned by anybody. It's not, people kind of equate it to Western science, but everyone's used that approach where there's an issue or a problem that needs to be addressed, and they define that problem, look at that problem from different angles, study it. And the next thing they do is they begin to think about, whether or not anyone else has had that problem. So they talk to people. It's like your literature review, right? Having that issue and you talk to people, you sort of have this conversation with others. And it could be very spiritual too, where a person goes off and dreams about the problem, which has happened, of course, throughout humanity. Interestingly enough, the periodic table of elements was the result of a dream. The sewing needle was also the result of a person dreaming, that you, at the end of the needle, you had to have a hole in there to thread through the thread to thread it, right? And those both came during periods of when a person was dreaming. So it makes a lot of sense too, because a lot that happens when we're resting our mind is that we get there's some theory that when our mind is rested and we're not pushing ourselves on a particular problem, we get a shift of blood flow in our brain from the left side to the right side of hemodynamic activity. And that's when we get these aha moments. We could be driving down the road, not thinking about the problem, it'll come to us. Or we'll be sitting there just relaxed, and that name will come back to us that we were trying to remember. Or, a solution to the problem will come to us, or it'll come in a dream, or it'll come in the shower or something. That's how the brain works. So I think it's another part of science, is that, it's those aha moments when you're kind of in that period of investigation. So that's the part of the literature review. The other part of it, I guess, is kind of like setting up the theoretical framework, right? What does that mean? Well, it means like, maybe people from all different parts of the world at different times have tried to solve a problem. So they knew different ways that people try to solve it. That's kind of the theories that are out there. We tried this, we tried that, we tried this, and then they come upon one and they'll say, well, this works here. This kind of, way that they did it works here, but it doesn't work in this context, right? And so this is what people did, quite a bit. That's kind of the empirical sort of observations that happen. People have always had, observe things for change and have tried to replicate things, throughout history. And of course, then they develop their intervention, or they do whatever they need to do to kind of address it, whatever it is. It could be training a horse. It could be, starting a fire, a million years ago. It could be making, hunting tools, or it could be, adding some element to an equation that, sparks what they call criticality in nuclear physics, where we realize that, there's a shift, a paradigm shift in something, where it reaches a state of a critical state, right? Or like where water boils or whatever. And so people observe that and they see that, and then they generally, that's where counting comes in, observation comes in. So people have used numbers forever. So that's what I think about when I think about science. And then at that point, the science goes out to others, and people learn that, and they say, how did you do that, right? And then people say, well, if you pay me for it, I'll show you. Or if you give me that, I'll show you, whatever it is, right? That's kind of been another thing about human beings forever, is that, everything has a cost. I'll show you this, but I see that of yours. Can you show me how you did that, or whatever? So there's always this exchange, right? So
I love that you mentioned aha moments because I always talk about those, and to validate those moments of connection and aha and spirituality in a sense of, you're learning something from a memory, or, like you said, I love that, your brain is, the blood is shifting in different parts so that you can remember stuff and connect with other things, make relationships, and that recognition I think is important. And I always ask my students, like, oh, I know you had an aha moment when you're trying to figure something out, and everyone says yes, or, or a dream or whatnot that has gotten them to a place. Like, but did you write about that? Did you recognize that in the work that you do? Like, oh no, I can't do that. But that's important, right? It's important to
Right.
recognize that that's a method that got you to that place. No.
Right.
Um, so I'm curious how you got into the field that you're in. And what was there an aha moment that got you into this work?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of aha moments in my life, I guess, and maybe that's one of the things is that I have my approach to life is, I think my learning style. And I would say I'm probably what they call an assimilative learner.
Mm.
I assimilate a lot of information. I read a lot of things. I study a lot of things. I read outside of my discipline. I read a lot of theory from a number of different disciplines. I study history. I read and follow different people. And then I try to integrate that, knowledge with, ancestral knowledge too, as well. I look at patterns, I'm good at looking at patterns and looking at trends and those kinds of things. And because of that, I think that's sort of gotten me into a lot of different fields to use, different things into the work that I do. I realize that it's what you want to build, a car, or if you want to build a model, or if you want to build, some kind of idea that you want to be able to kind of build that. But also a person like me, I want to test it in a number of different kind of circumstances, right? I don't want it to be just something that is functional for one, environment. It's very important. And I think that's sort of what's kind of got me to where I was, is kind of think, okay, if I only stay in this area in social sciences, what will it produce, or how useful will that information be?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are things that I've done, I think, is to get those aha moments, like, okay, this piece fits together with this piece. We can find parallels in different kinds of models and theories, things that people do. Essentially, human beings kind of come up with very similar ideas, nothing too far out of this world, but there's always seems to be, to me, an extension of an idea, or a connection to the idea, a parallel to the idea, or to, some kind of, discovery, or whatever it is, I guess it's a bit like, oh gosh, thinking about, how when people, I'm trying to remember the example, when people look at a cup, how many uses are there for a cup, right? Yeah, you look at it and you kind of say, ask, how many uses can you find for this cup? People say, well, you can drink out of it, you can plant a flower in it, you can use it to cover, something, or you can, use it to cook, bake something in, or you can use it, to, whatever. There's, you could probably find 70 different uses, right?
Yeah.
So it's like words, right? With people, they'll give you words like A, I, O, and U, and J and K or something, and you'll say, they'll say, no, you should be able to make 80 words out of this, right? And then you go about
Yeah.
discovering how you can do that, and all of a sudden you said, well, I made 85, so there's a couple more words you can make out of it, or whatever. So I think that's the thing about science, and the way that I do it is I'm always looking at things, and then I try to take things that haven't been done before in my discipline and do it. Like right now, I'm just finishing a paper with a colleague, but I've been working on this paper for a long time, and just finally decided to try to finish it this year. Probably I've been working on it for 15 years, just kind of looking at it and playing with it a bit. But it is a probabilistic equation for decolonization. I believe, I believe that there's a way to really look at, decolonization, and measure it, right? And decolonization is really this complex, multifaceted ongoing process that's, been debated and discussed, defined and critiqued in all these different ways. And it, as far as I can see, it has never undergone a formal measurement process to determine when it is occurring, right? People say, well, you get back your language, you get back your culture, this is all decolonization. Well, what does that really mean? Part of the paper, I haven't written this part yet, though, I'll say, getting back all your land, and getting back your language, is that going to cure your mental health issues? Is that going to cure your economic issues? That's just one part. Those are one part. So the probabilistic equation that I'm creating, I'm based it upon, 7 key factors, like a growth mindset, sovereignty. I have in this model cultural revitalization, economic independence, political independence, and social justice, and a few other things. And then I look at the continuing impact of colonial structures and legacy, which takes away from that. So it's a weighted sort of thing. And I'm looking at, this to kind of discover, like, how if I look at 4 communities and did these interviews and they answered these interviews, what would the outcome look like? So, like, for example, community 1, what if I discovered that community 1, based upon, all the factors that I identified in the literature that people have talked about, like, getting your land back or culture back or being economically independent. What if that it only added up to 50% decolonization, right? What does that mean, right? And how healthy will you be if you're at 50% decolonization? What if you're up to 70%? What does that look like? So that's when I do things like that, I do it, kind of in a way that a lot of my work is more heuristic, in terms and edifying, rather than this is the final word. I like to work on things I think that are complex. I like to work them through, and then I like to say, okay, here's what I did. Let's get some other whiz kid, some whiz indigenous kid to kind of like take this and extend the analysis, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm doing now I believe that, so I think that's, what I do in my work is to kind of pull these pieces together to develop, something that someone hasn't done. I read the stuff and I think, okay, what hasn't been done here? And then I'll say, oh, okay, maybe let's try this. And that's what I'm doing. And I think that's part of who I am. That's just my curious nature. So.
Oh, I'm curious about the curious nature. In a second, I'm stuck at the equation. Can there ever be like 100% decolonization? Like, can we get there? Do you think?
I don't know if you'd want that. I mean,
Right?
why would you want to be 100% decolonized, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we have human populations have always integrated knowledge, beliefs, and values from others. Even the animal world. Even the animal world is structured around relationships and values and those kinds of things. Human beings have borrowed, from our sentient, relatives, whether they're forests or rivers or four-leggeds or those that fly. That's what we've done. We've always noticed behaviors and attributes and skills that they have that we want, mimic. So that's also true about the Chinese. Chinese have, do kung fu, like tiger kung fu or dragon or whatever it is. They and different tribes, on Turtle Island do deer dances, bear dances, snake dances, thunderbird, whatever. These are things that human beings embody. So it's like they are inviting into themselves, this other kind of knowledge base, right? And I'm not sure what 100% decolonization looks like, first of all. Could never be sure about that. But again, I think a healthy Indigenous community, is kind of my belief, is that it has a level of hybridity. There's a hybrid and a healthy relationship it has with other cultures, because it knows their language, it knows their values, it knows their, belief systems, and respects them, and they get that reciprocity back and forth, right? So if you look at decolonization as a very pure thing, and like, people are going to be, I think, a bit surprised, I think, when we start talking about, whether or not Indigenous people were capitalists, right? So, well, they were never capitalists, whatever. Every society was, socialist society or whatever. That's not true. Just looking at the history, you'll see that different tribes accumulated different kinds of wealth. Our tribes, three affiliated tribes, accumulated wealth in their horticultural culture, right? They had all kinds of potatoes, all kinds of vegetables, that stuff that was, a form of currency for them. So when they traded with the Cree or the Anishinaabe or the Cheyenne or whoever it was, they were trading, they had a currency, and they'll say, well, boy, the Anishinaabe said, boy, we really would like some of those beans, those Arikara beans. They're pretty tasty. They go good with, wild rice or something, right? And they'll say, well, this is what it's going to cost you, right? And they'll say, and they'll barter and bargain back and forth and say, okay, and then there'll be, that'll be like any stock. It'll be, worth, a certain amount of currency for that, for that product, right? So when you think about decolonization, I think those are some of the things that have to be teased out of it. I don't think we've teased those things out very well. But it's like, someone will take this analysis and they'll make it better. They'll take my analysis and make it better. But that's the whole purpose of what I do, is to kind of, say, what about this? And then let people look at it. And there'll be those people who say, this doesn't make any sense, I'm not doing that. But other people will take it and be creative with it. And, at some point they'll take it and they'll, partner up with AI, and they'll come up with something even more precise, artificial intelligence will, with indigenous knowledge, will kind of maybe be a game changer, right? Systems change. You might see a dramatic sort of shift in the paradigm of what we mean by decolonization. So,
I love how you said the importance of like that hybrid, and I think there's often the decolonization is becoming maybe more of a negative word, or it's recolonizing in a way. And I've seen those conversations, but I think that aspect of reciprocity, where there's that respect for another teaching, or you're talking about dances or like trade and whatnot, and that it's a respect for that, whatever that may be, that teaching, that food, that whatnot. And there's that, that, and I say that with the work that I do within Indigenous science, and how there's no right or wrong. Yes, Western global science is given a lot, and a lot of what we have around us is from that. But also, what are we missing if we're not embracing that alongside Indigenous science, alongside land-based science? And how, if we have just a narrow perspective of the world around us, then what are we missing? And I think,
I think, really there's only one science. I really think there's one science, but I think, different cultures wield it in different ways, for different purposes, right? Depending upon what their needs are, depending upon what their motivations are, people can use science in different ways. And of course, some groups are just over the mountain, maybe using it in a completely different way than the other group on the other side of the mountain, so. But yeah, it's I think it runs along the same lines, just the philosophies of use of science, I think, are different. So
yeah, absolutely. And in validating and incorporating, whether we, a parent or not, those spiritual aha moments and whatnot. It's those are important. I'm curious, a lot of the work that you do with like neuro decolonization. Can you explain what that is and some of the work that you do within that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Good question. But neurodecolonization is the idea that, the brain can be decolonized from the effects of colonization that have, ravaged the body and the mind, for a long time. As human beings, we don't even need to have decolonization occur, like, because we really evolved, with an evolutionary perspective, of the fear of others, right? It's called, stranger danger is what they call it, right? And that's really kind of been for all of us a survival mechanism in our ancestral past, where we encounter other individuals, from other tribes or other groups or whatever, and We say, well, they could be a threatening group. We got to be careful, right? Because they may be a threat to us, right? Maybe they're a threat to our resources, our territory, our lives, or whatever. So we've had this sort of natural distrust that's existed, among groups. And so I think that's really a big part of who we are, to kind of to begin things of who we are. So what neurodecolonization does then is kind of recognize that we have these fears already, and some of them are important, to help keep us safe. But with colonization, of course, there's a continued kind of oppression that occurs, the lack of safety, the uncertainty, the control and manipulation. And of course, the oppression, the structural oppression, the individualist oppression that comes because you're different, because, your gender is different, because your ethnicity is different, because your race is different, because you're geographically different, or whatever it is. And that's kind of the fear of others that happens. And then the groups that have the largest sort of influence and strength, can control that narrative. They can control that situation. And so with Indigenous people, that's really been a long, long road to kind of deal with, because Indigenous people have been stereotyped for hundreds of years, and treated, in particular stereotypical ways, that has brought about a sense of, oppression and isolation and marginalization and those kinds of things. So that on top of our natural sort of evolution of fear of others, kind of puts up other layers, that colonization does. So neurodecolonization is like, okay, so how do I begin to decolonize the mind? And that's the thing about what we did in that exercise, was to kind of pay a bit of attention to our feelings, our emotions, and the thoughts and memories that we have. And that's what neurodecolonization kind of takes into consideration. What are those ruminations that we have in an everyday, process? If they're about residential schools, if they're about missing and murdered Indigenous women, if they're about, high levels of mortality in your community, those are all sort of much related to colonization, right? And how do we deal with those? Well, the thing is, we have to understand how they're affecting us, what they're doing to our body, what they're doing to our molecular system and our cellular systems. And that's what neurodecolonization is really about, is kind of not only understanding, the colonization, but really what it does to our body, as I said. And we know that there's a lot of damage that's done internally on at a molecular level. We get damage in our DNA, we get damage in our telomeres at the end of our chromosomes, we get damage in our brains, we get damage, in our cells, cellular systems, and so on. And those kinds of things, are related to poorer outcomes, health outcomes. And so I'm interested in not only how colonization affects us and what it does to us, but what kinds of practices then, decolonizing practices can we do to overcome those kinds of things. And a lot of my work gets back then to traditional practices. Like one of the biggest ones I talk about all the time is how much our movement has been decolonized. We sit and sit and sit and sit, everyone does. Our ancestors never sat like we sit today. They were constantly moving, moving around, going and migrating and doing different things, or going to visit each other, walking, the distance, and carrying heavy things. And because of that, our bodies have taken a real, there's been a big toll taken on our bodies, a lot of metabolic diseases like, obesity and high levels of blood glucose and high blood pressure and heart disease and those kinds of things, right, are really prevalent among Indigenous people, very high. And a big part of it is like, the simple thing about it is movement, right? Movement begins to conquer a lot of those metabolic diseases. You add to that, neurodecolonization, what makes our mind feel better, running does, movement does, rains are what they call brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a protein factor in our brain, which actually rises when we exercise and we move and we walk and we play and we run up hills and play tag and laugh and move around. That BDNF increases in our brain, so it protects our brain cells, from failing, and it repairs failing cells, and then it increases brain cells in our brain, what they call neurogenesis, which we need. When I've done some work and looked at the rates of neurodegenerative diseases among Indigenous people on Turtle Island, climbing exponentially. Dementias, Alzheimer's, climbing at such a fast rate. Something like that is a novel disease among those populations because they didn't live like we live today. And that's just one thing. Our movement has been colonized. And in order to decolonize the mind, we have to move. We have to walk. We have to get our heart rates up. We have to play. We have to carry heavy things, and be outside a lot more than we do. There's no pill that's going to fix that. There's no pharmaceutical drug that's going to, make it better. All it's going to do is mask some of the symptoms, right? It's not going to raise our brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And movement also raises our endocannabinoids, in our brain that also help, protect our brain, that also reduce pain, and they make us feel better. They're mood enhancers, right? Mm-hmm. Laughter does the same thing. It's another thing I talk about is laughter, how Indigenous people have higher frequencies of a particular gene called the serotonin transporter gene in their populations, which is associated with humor. It's been studied. It's a gene that if you've got the short alleles for it, short gene variants, you're more likely to to giggle and laugh and tease and tell funny stories. And I see that all the time when I look at social media. All these Indigenous people, they love to laugh. They like all kinds of jokes all the time, about aunties and uncles and all. I mean, all this stuff. I'm just like cracking up watching it all the time. Doesn't even matter if they're from my tribe. It's like, this person's not from my tribe, but they're speaking my language here with this humor, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense. Tribal people have had sacred clowns. They've had, social structures where teasing and fun and those kinds of things are appropriate. And all that sort of stuff is part of the human history, right? And so that's another thing. Our humor has been colonized, our well-being and our laughter has been colonized, right? Because we're reminded that we're not in such a good place with residential schools, with poverty, those kinds of things. But take it from me, when you look at history, when I looked at history, a lot of these tribes would look like, well, they're pretty impoverished people, but boy, they're still laughing. And this is, I'm talking about 200 years ago, right? And I start looking, reading about history where these tribes they haven't eaten for days, but they're still out there working and laughing, telling jokes, right? And that makes perfect sense because when you laugh, it's not only, you not only get a good feeling, but it also raises the brain-derived neurotrophic factor in your brain that protects your brain cells. When you laugh, it also raises endocannabinoids, which protects your brains and makes you feel better. It dulls the hunger. It dulls, the pain, right? That's why tribes use a lot of laughter. You look at some tribes, they talk about, laughing at death, counting coup on, fear, laughing at fear. And of course, what it does is it raises, this neurochemistry to make you feel better. So those are some of the things that neurodecolonization I talk about, not only like movement and laughter, but also fragrances, how smelling certain fragrances can activate the olfactory system in your brain to help improve your memory. That's science has been done. It's shown that, right? That's why human beings are so, attached and enamored by certain smells that really sort of evoke memories. They evoke, feelings of good or fear, right? So studies have been done where these diffusers have been put in with people, and they put, whatever essential oil they have in there. And after, so many weeks, 12 weeks of having that in there, diffusing, that for 2 hours a night, 4 times a week, you see pretty dramatic improvements, like 226% improvements in memory of some of these groups that have been doing that. So think about that. It makes perfect sense. That's what we did early on as human beings. We all sat around the fire. We threw certain kinds of things in there, and pretty soon, the shamans or the spiritual leaders or whatever you call them, the holy people would say a prayer, and they would throw something in the fire that they said that was given to us by a creator or whatever, higher power. That evokes those memories that and it creates, again, these feelings of well-being and a sense of awe and so on. Very fundamental things that human beings have done that we can return to. And that's neurodecolonization, is returning back to those things. Dancing is the same thing. Dancing does the same thing. Singing does the same thing, right? Being outside, sitting in a hot sauna or sitting in a sweat lodge or taking an ice cold bath every morning or a cold shower, they all do the same thing. Those mechanisms all work. So the indigenous people that were doing the things that they did prior to colonization were all things that people are now kind of catching on to. And all these influencers that talk about health are all talking about these things and how important they're to do. I said, well, these are things that, all cultures have done, but as some cultures moved in, they banned them, they outlawed them, they prevented them from happening. They tried to replace them, and now you have Turtle Island, danceless cultures, you have people don't sing unless, they're singing on their own. People don't just go sing in the streets or sing for everything, or they don't dance or do those things like we did. We evolved to do these things, and we have the mechanisms to do it. The body and the physical body to do it, but we also have the internal, chemistry to activate that activates when we do these things, that protects us and makes us healthier, protects our brain, and that's kind of what neurodecolonization is all about. So,
yeah, wow. I love the laughter and the humor because, we know that's all true. And we all know that, when the aunties and uncles make fun of you, that means they love you.
right.
I always say, right? Um, yeah, it's like this colonization and it's almost a sterilization in a sense of, that not being able to move or, you only learn in a classroom, you're not, on the land. There's not those fragrances, those connections, those frequencies of dance and song as well, right?
Mm.
Is there like a fragrance that like that's I understand, there's smells that we like individually specifically connect with and have memories with, but is there like a general smell that's like, yeah, this is definitely something that you've seen that has helped a lot of people with memory? Or
Well, I think they tried in this some of the studies I was looking at. They tried a number, like 10 different things. Like eucalyptus oil, I think was one. Rose was another.
Mhm.
Orange was another. I was joking. I said, mine would be bacon. I said, mine, but it's kind of, I think sage would probably, work a lot. Maybe if there was
Mhm.
I'm sure if there was an essential oil of sweetgrass, or sage, or even, anything like that,
Yeah.
I happen to think that, it's probably a lot related to, you know, um, a genetic memory that, can be evoked by, the smell of something, even like the smell of a certain kind of wood burning or whatever it is,
I was gonna say fire, campfire. Yeah.
Yeah, campfire.
You're right.
I
Yeah.
mean, one of the things that, people have talked about, I think, when I've looked at some of the sleep research, is that when people have like the sound of a fire burning and they hear the crackling and popping, some people, evolutionary folks have said, well, people sleep well probably because they realize there's a fire there, and that the fire was the protector, right, against anyone coming. So you could see the people, or if there was any wild animals, they would stay away from the fire. So you've got the fire there as kind of that's a firewall. The fire is the firewall, right? From and protection against, predators or something. So you sleep well, because you hear that. Or the other thing too is that there was another study I was looking at. Of course, they were thinking why people don't sleep as well now is because a lot of people sleep alone or sleep with one partner, when most cultures have slept all together. A big
Mm.
bed of people, like maybe 10 people sleeping together, in one
Mhm.
big bed, and the sound of other people snoring and breathing, sort of brings sort of a whole kind of sense of calm to the group, right?
Mhm.
And when you're by yourself, you don't hear that. You can wake up, and that's just one theory, out of many different kinds of theories. But people are looking back to our evolutionary time and thinking, how did we get so far away from that to do the things that we do? That everyone's got their own bedroom and everyone's got their own bed and so on, whatever, right? Um, um,
That
so
disconnect. Yeah, that
yeah,
disconnect of
it's
rooms and walls and
right.
disconnect from people.
Yeah, you're not connected to people like you are,
Yeah.
so.
I think I'm gonna find a like fire sounds as my white noise to go to bed too. I feel like that would
Yeah,
help me a
yeah.
lot. Oh, amazing. Um, I'm curious as well, and I was going to ask, how can people do this? And we have a huge list of all the things that people can do, from movement and fragrances, laughing, go outside. Um, what is you're talking about mindfulness? You know, we're talking about the body. We're talking almost individually in a sense, maybe less so, but you've also spoken about mindfulness and systemic racism. And
Yeah.
is that can you speak more about this and what this means? I feel like this is, often I think the general idea of mindfulness is like, what can I do for myself? I can meditate for myself. I, will work out, eat well for myself. But I feel like this mindfulness, in how I understand it, is that it's more collective, right? It's more of a community group aspect. Is that right? Or am I
Well,
totally
it can
misunderstanding?
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people belong to, what Buddhists call sanghas, right? I mean, these are groups of people that all meditate together and support one another. So,
Hmm.
but it also can be a very individualistic experience as well, too. Um, so I think one of the things that's really important about um, mindfulness is that everybody can do it. Everybody does it, at some different points of the time of the day. They pay attention to what they're doing, on purpose, without judging, the experience they're having. So we all do it all the
Hmm.
time. We're not necessarily meditating, for long periods of time, but if you're cooking something, or if you're doing, if you're, trying to remember, or if you're writing a letter, or whatever it is, it takes mindfulness to kind of stay in the moment, right?
Hmm.
Or but that's the key thing about it, is that what we know from research is that when we begin to interrupt this incessant train of thoughts that are always sort of streaming through the brain, when we can interrupt those and we can sort of center and focus, on our breathing, then we begin to see really important things happen, in the brain and the body. There's a guy by the name of Herbert Benson who was at Harvard University as a professor there. He's a medical doctor, but he studied meditation, back in the late 60s, mid 60s, late 60s, early 70s. He wrote a book called The Relaxation Response, as opposed to the fight and flight response. And his work was based upon, observing, monks, meditating, I think when he was in Tibet, I believe it was.
Hmm.
And he, began to see how, when people got into this state of relaxation, this deep state, and when they focused on their breath, how, things began to change for them. And he was doing this way back when protocol was 20 minutes in the morning, just just breathing and relaxing the body and focusing on a prayerful word, or a word that, loving word, whatever it is, like beauty, or, I am beauty. You would say that to yourself as you breathe in, and then just breathe out, breathe in, I am beauty, for 20 minutes, right?
Mm.
Just sort of visualize you being a beautiful person, right? Then at the end of the day, do it again. Um, and what he found, from his research, he published in 2010, long after he had done this, but after genetic testing uh, um, was more available and more affordable, he took a cohort of people, put them through his protocol, took blood samples before they started, sort of did this, and then put him through the program. I think he tested them in the middle part and then at the end part. But I think he found that, consistently, when people had reached like 8 weeks of that kind of practice, that they had changed hundreds of different, they had the expression of hundreds of different genes in their body. And the vast majority, the huge majority, were genes that express for health, right?
Mm.
For improving their health, for turning, and then the other ones turned off were these other genes that were related to oxidative stress and inflammation in the body, which brings a lot of diseases like, Alzheimer's, or rheumatoid arthritis, or, all those different kinds of inflammatory diseases. So, so then, and if people have been studying that now, looking at, how mindfulness changes, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that it does is there's been good science looking at mindfulness about how it can address systemic, racism. It doesn't really talk about it in that way, but I think about it in that way, is that, people who meditate for, longer periods of time, let's say 100 hours to 1,000 hours to 5,000 hours, or 500 hours, whatever it is, they're meditating, begin to change some important structures in the brain. For instance, there's activation in a place called the temporal parietal junction, the TPJ. That's a circuit in the brain, and the evidence shows that when people do the meditation, let's say for 500 hours, 500 hours, an hour every day for 500 days, whatever it is, then that part of the brain becomes activated, and it really raises your level of understanding the mental state of others, as well as the emotional state of others. So it really raises your level of emotional intelligence. The more you meditate, it seems, it raises your level of emotional intelligence. This is something I like to talk about in my presentations when I talk about neurodecolonization, is that when you raise your level of emotional intelligence, then it's much easier to kind of see when people are in distress, right? And it also helps mitigate negative feelings as well, right? So that's good, because then you're looking at people more, not as just people, but you're looking at their mental and emotional state. And then that raises your level of compassion too. Your eyes, you see the person, mirror neurons in the brain that kind of reflect what's happening, then reflect you. So if you see them in distress and your activation is happening in the temporal parietal junction, and your mirror neurons are picking that up, you're much more likely to kind of do something, a pro-social behavior, help someone across the street, a child or an elder, or if someone slipped, help them up, right? Or not just walk by them, when they're obviously in distress, like people do all the time, because their brains are just sort of like wildebeests on the savannas of Africa. They're just running to avoid the lions, right? So they're mindful of, not being eaten, right? But we're not mindful because we're off to one thing to the next. So that's one thing. The other thing is there's another part of the brain called the insula that's activated. The insula, is sort of located right, two of them, kind of this part of the brain. You can see it down here, but kind of here. The insula, from some of the research, shows that when that's activated, when you're doing a lot of meditation, the insula kind of really helps you sort of deal with conflict. It mediates conflict, helps resolve conflict. If you come into conflict with a different, an idea that conflicts with your idea, or, a learning or a person or some conflict, this helps sort of bring that level of conflict down. So it opens you up more to kind of be more, open to others. And the research shows there's a lot that happens with social and emotional learning, SEL, for young people. And for young kids, it really helps. Meditation also really helps. Mindfulness meditation really helps with their executive function in the brain, where it helps them avoid distraction, delay gratification, their need to want for anything, but also to move from one cognitive task to the next, fairly smoothly. You want to start kids really early meditating so that they develop that capacity to kind of observe before they say, I want this, or rather than diving at that, or getting distracted by something, so they can stay focused, right? And then, of course, move from one, as I say, task to the next. So, these are things that all cultures have done at one time. It's not just, mindfulness that people are talking about it now, but when you look at it historically, cultures have done this all the time. And that's why at one time, when there were no written cultures, I'll say it that way, because people have always written, even if they've carved, on rocks or carved on cliffs, or, left symbols down, for, their people to follow them when they're going on a long journey, 20,000, 30,000 years ago. That's all to me a form of writing, right? Could be like shorthand writing, whatever. Yeah. But prior to that, people used a lot of oral sort of communication. And those are the things that are remembered really well too, that people transmit, stories and circumstances, and that orally, to others. So it's just another way, I think, of transmission. So when I think about systemic racism, then those are the things I think about, is like, we have to get people to, be open to doing these kinds of things so that they're more reflective, on their, when I say reflective, that's what people say, be more reflective on your privilege or whatever it is, right? That's okay, that's an important thing to say, but that's really doesn't give people a formula to do that. Mindfulness practice does. It tells you that, some of the 100 hours, you begin to see stress levels go down. You begin to see, changes in neural effects and also hormonal effects. Neural effects could be that, you see activation and maybe a part of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC circuit, that's related to empathy and compassion after 100 hours of practice. Empathy and compassion go up after 100 hours of practice. You may see that your level of emotional regulation gets better, so you're not just jumping on someone, right? And saying, or saying, oh, that person did that, or that, whatever it is, so you start to see those kinds of things happen in the brain, and as more is better. We know more is better. So there's a lot of different parts of the brain that are affected by that, and different parts of the body that are affected by that. So those kinds of things alone, I think, would begin to kind of damp down that systemic racism, to see where people can see one another in that way. There's also a part of the brain, I'm trying to remember which part of the brain it is, where when you do a lot of meditation, the part of the brain that's connected to your self-identity, maybe it's the nucleus accumbens, I'm trying to remember. Whatever that part of the brain, which is, is about like, okay, it's all about me. More meditation you do, that part of the brain that's all about me sort of begins to shrink a bit. And you begin to, your identification yourself gets, less. And what happens is that you then begin to identify with us. We're all of us, all the people. Maybe it's the land, it's the water, it's the skies, the stars, whatever it is. You start having that experience of transcendence. And we know that happens after many hours of meditation, where a person starts to have this. There's a guy by the name of Andrew Newberg who's written about this topic, about when people have these transcendent experiences, from doing a lot of meditation. One of the things he did was he studied the brains of monks, Buddhist monks, and of nuns when they were having these transcendent experiences, looked at their brains and scanned them while in real time, and found out that one of the things that was happening with the brain was that the parietal lobe, I think on the right side of the brain, went offline. And as that part of the brain went offline, they began to experience this sense of timelessness, like there was no time. The sense of spacelessness, like, nothing was keeping them here. That was just like, it was just they were just no, they were not confined, anyway. And also this feeling of transcendence is like, wow, oh, now I understand what it means to be connected to the great circle of life, right? To all the planets and all the universe, all the universes that exist out there and everything. You have this, we've got the same, people fundamentally have that same brain. And to get to that place takes, a lot of hours of practice. So this is what he saw, right? And so when I look at my work in neurodecolonization, when I look at Indigenous people doing ceremony and realize they've been doing that ceremony, not just on the weekend or not just during a powwow or not a few times a year, but they're doing it constantly, for hours a day, just like you would do meditation, at least 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day, whatever it is. The quicker you can get to that longer distance is then when you're going to activate that, place in your brain where you start having those experiences of transcendence, and you'll say, wow, this is not unlike using psychedelic medicines to have that sort of opening up that, brain in that way, so it gives you, much larger sort of view of the world. And that's what's coming, right? That's what's coming now. People are using psychedelic medicine. That's becoming more and more part of who we are. At the time when singularity arrives, when machines, have the capacity to do more than human beings, at some point we'll pair with machines. We'll have this kind of hybrid experience. I've been looking at Ray Kurzweil's work, and it's kind of interesting. He's a futurist and someone who writes a lot about AI. He's a pretty well-respected scientist, and looked at, how when machines and humans come together and there's sort of a connection that's built. One of the things he says, is that, I don't know if this number is correct, but or if it's something he's just estimating that, humans will be 1,000,000 times smarter than we are now because we have this kind of capacity with AI and AI's capacity to know all this knowledge and information, right? So, that's going to be a huge paradigm shift. So when we're talking about, people being kind, and compassionate, we can facilitate it probably with that. I mean, already, now we know there's pharmaceutical drugs in the making that are being tested to help us erase all of our traumatic memories. That drug is being, even as we speak, is being experimented with and looked at, right? So, there's all the ethical questions behind that too as well. But my point is, there's a lot of things that are happening and coming, and we're going to see these pretty major paradigm shifts, as human beings in the next 10, 20, 50 years. We won't even have to wait 100 years. I think in 50 years, we're going to see some pretty dramatic changes happening, more dramatic than we've probably ever seen on the planet, that's going to enable human beings to do things that, we thought, we were not capable of. So.
What was the name of that scientist, the futurist?
Ray Kurzweil.
Kurzweil.
I don't know if I've got his book here. It's in my house. Yeah, Kurzweil. But he writes about singularity. So.
I'm curious. I've had, a lot of conversations about AI and that. How do we use AI and work alongside AI in a good way? And AI, like, I've heard so many different conversations of with, Indigenous scientists and Indigenous community members of AI as trickster, but also as shapeshifter, but also AI as, like another, in a good way, something. I guess trickster is good too, but what can we learn from AI? What is it supporting that, like you said, can support, how much smarter we can be, or more compassionate, or more. Yeah.
Well, I look at AI, and people should look at it this way, as an existential threat, right? But also I'm one of those people that look at it as an existential opportunity. So, and knowing human history, what humans do with things. I mean, we think about technology, it's probably the first technology, we ever discovered or had or invented, for ourselves, was fire, right? We created fire. The potential fire was always there. Could be created by lightning bolts struck, or if two rocks struck together in a dry forest, it would start. But humans, when they learn how to start fire, that's when it became a technology for them. Can you imagine the first, human being out there that learned how to strike two rocks together, two pieces of flint together to start a fire? That person was a rock star in the village, man. It's like, whoa, did you see what Og did? It's like, this
like a magician, probably.
Right. It's like they split the atom, right? When the atom was split, it's like, well, okay. And of course, fire then was used for good purposes. Cook your food, keep you warm, light it up at night when you needed light, and then to keep
help you sleep.
Yeah, sleep, keep predators away, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't take long for people to learn how to use it in not so good ways. So I don't think it's a technology; it's human nature that's part of really what it is. So with AI, it could be, if machines become self-sustaining and replicating, and that sort of thing. But it's like, the same thing with guns, right? With guns, a very, important technology for, protection and whatever, and hunting and food and stuff, but also became, war. And then pretty soon, robberies and, and then killing and murdering people, right? So human beings, will do the same thing with AI. It's just there's no question about it, right? You know, they did it with a flint loading rifle to shoot one musket ball, you know, took about 5 minutes to reload it or something, and up to, you know, automatic weapons, you know, where you could fire hundreds of shots, you know, in just, you know, short, you know, seconds of time, right? So that's why for me, you know, I've got a project going down to my home reservation back in North Dakota with Native youth and AI. So I think we need to get ahead of this. I think our you know, young people, everyone should come to understand, you know, what AI is, to be very illiterate, to use it, you know, responsibly and ethically, but to be people that really have a really deep understanding and a facility to kind of use it in a way, you know, that is going to be helpful for the community, right? So, and if you don't understand it, and if you just depend upon other people to kind of give you their impression of it, you know, like what's always happened with technology, then, you know, then it's difficult for you to kind of figure out how you can use it, or what, you know, or when you should use it, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Fascinating AI conversations. Something that I'm curious about that connects with when you mentioned smells that are, you know, important, or that we would maybe connect with. And I thought of campfire, I thought of like sage and sweetgrass, and you mentioned those like ancestral, like DNA connections of smells that maybe, you know, connect with our DNA. And I think about that with food. It's something that I've been thinking about lately, is that ancestral connection to food, and like blue zones. Like if I were to do another PhD, which I'm not, and I've said this on the pod before, someone could take my idea, and I know it's out there, but that, you know, the connection with the people that live to over 100 years in different blue zones, and, you know, they're active, and I think it connects with a lot of things that you've said. They're active. They have a garden. They eat well. They, you know, they have community. You know, they're in the present moment. But I'm thinking, like, they eat the food of that land that they grow, and like, what is that connection with those ancestral foods? And I feel like we've become so distant from that, and I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting when I think about food, because I think about, you know, before the age of agriculture, about 10,000-12,000 years ago, what happened, you know, with human beings. You know, as human beings, we're all pretty much hunter-gatherers on the planet, and they had to move. You know, that persistence, you know, running was in our heritage, meaning that we had to run after our food, we had to walk after our food. And so calories were really critical. Calories probably the most important thing of anything, you know, back in the day. It's important now because we have too many of them, right? In our first world country, and it's important because third world countries where there's war and droughts and those kinds of things, they don't have enough calories. So the same thing existed, you know, you know, over 10,000 years ago, where people like, how much do you expend to get that meal? You know, how many calories? You know, you can't be in a deficit, because starvations, famines, you know, insects, whatever, or animals could eat your garden, or animals could, you know, end up with some kind of disease where the numbers would go down, or different fungi or different things would take the plants out. So humans had to learn to be very, very diverse in their eating, very diverse. So they ate a lot of different plants. They didn't eat as many animals, right? They ate some animals. They got their protein, and theory is when we started eating, you know, animal protein, that's when we grew a bigger brain, you know, like fish and those kinds of things. They were harder to get, you know, hard to catch fish and hard to catch animals. So
And it
people had
expends a lot of energy and calories to,
yeah, a lot of calories. Yep.
Yeah.
So the easiest thing was to go into the woods or go across the plains and find things that, you know, were there that we could eat. And that took a lot of calories, a lot of movement. So the body then, you know, developed different kinds of genes that would, you know, help support us, you know, when we were starving, right? We'd have these genes, the serotonin transporter gene, that we would, you know, sharpen our senses, and we'd laugh at hunger, and would protect our brain, and we'd survive longer. But we also developed these other genes too. Some of the genes I think are FTO genes, trying to remember again. They call it fatty genes, I think, FTOs. But we also developed genes too that helped us put on weight really rapidly. So not everybody back in the day in all these villages were like the svelte, CrossFit looking people. If they were, that meant that probably they weren't getting enough calories. Women especially had to put on more calories to with babies. So we developed those. The people that developed them and could keep on the most fat and lower their metabolic rates, they survived the next famine, and they passed those genes on. The skinny people probably didn't make it, right? Or made it less frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So now today we see a lot of obesity that exists out there. People talk about it as a disease. People talk about it as, something that needs to be conquered and so on. But we still realize, and not much is talked about it, that it's an evolutionary sort of, outcome of who we were at one time. Now I'm not saying that about everybody, but I'm saying it does exist in there. So again, getting back to the foods that really sort of rung true to us were those that were nutrient dense foods that we could get, as much as we could. So there came a time when we could get animal fats, that people used a lot of animal fats in their cooking, and they ate them, and they ate when you say indigenous people ate every part of the animal, they did.
Mm-hmm.
Was it because they had a great respect for the animal? Probably, but also because they didn't know when they were going to eat next. They had to eat everything, nothing could go to waste. Every bit of that meant it was part of a calorie that sustained the population. So those two things, culture and genes, co-evolve. If you have genes for the sacredness of the world, they co-evolve with hunger, and food needs, right? So that's one thing. So you have to remember that's what we did. We ate a lot of plants, and that's why some plants that are more fatty plants, that have omega-3 fatty acids, things like chia seeds or quinoa or those kinds of things. Certain plants had more fats that we used, and sometimes those things were easier to convert into the fats that we needed into the body. Now we don't always convert those well. We can't convert the DHA I forget the other fat, so well. So we have to take supplements sometimes or eat fish more often, because things like flaxseed, contain the same DHA, but they're hard to convert for some people because, our bodies haven't been doing that for a long period of time. The thing now that gets us are things that we need now that come back from our evolutionary heritage. So if we eat burgers and fries and drink a soda with that, or we have a mocha coffee with a lot of sugar or whatever it is, those are the things that we evolved to want. Salt,
Sacred Pepsi.
Yeah, salt, sugar, and fat, right?
Yeah.
I mean, salt was one of those things that we didn't get enough of. That was life and death, which may be a reason why we oversalt our food sometimes, because there's an evolutionary sort of, memory of, needing salt. I mean, groups that have traveled a long ways to find salt sometimes, or trade salt. Salt was like gold back in the day.
Yep.
And salt, meant that you were going to survive if you had to walk a long distance, because you wouldn't become dehydrated and die, right? Which is why now today, sometimes I'm one of those people. If I eat too much salt, I go pee a lot, because my body's trying to dump the excessive sodium in my body. My body, I look at my genetics, I realize that I probably do well with 1,000 milligrams to 1,500 milligrams, but more like 1,000 milligrams of salt a day. Getting over that, my blood pressure starts to go up, the body can swell, those kinds of things, right? So my body, some of my markers come from central Mexico, which makes sense to me, right? I need to probably, because of that desert climate, that I was living in 1,000 years ago or whatever it was, I had to be careful about that. Salt, right? Eat enough to survive, but not too much to overdo it, because the body's in this delicate kind of place. The sugar part is the same thing. Evolutionary folks have said that we never had that much sugar, the glucose. The only time we'd have that is when we ran into a beehive somewhere, or if you're down in, South America, some of those tribes had stevia or the sweetened plants, right? Or you could eat, some of the honey that you got from the beehives or whatever it was. So you wanted people stored up on that, which is why it's such a, these, big ag, puts so much sugar in all their products because it's addictive, right? Sugar and everything, right? And it's taking advantage of our evolutionary sort of blueprint. And the last one is fat. Same thing. Fat tastes good to us. I'm one of those people that I'm a super taster for fat. That's what my DNA shows. But I said, no surprise to me, man. I can taste all kinds of fats, the good fats and the bad fats in food.
Bacon.
Oh yeah, bacon. Uh, but I mean, I can taste it whether or not it's organic or whether or not it's you know uh, the industrial kind of fat, whatever it comes from. I can taste all the polyunsaturated fats that are like seed oils, like sunflower or canola oils. Those things, they're really strong. I can taste them, right? And those are the things that are the omega-6, polyunsaturated fats, which are for some people small amounts okay, but we don't want too much because some of it shows that it raises inflammation levels in the body. So, but anyway, salt, sugar, fat, those are the three things that you're going to find in most processed foods, and why people dig processed food so much, because the manufacturers, they sit around there with super testers or people and their psychologists and everybody, and they'll say, guess what, let's put this much sugar. I forget it. I used to remember this number, but is it if you get beyond like 12 grams of sugar, I think, in a cereal, then it's too much. If you get under 4 grams or like something like that, then it's not enough. Consumers won't buy it. So they find the sweet spot, which is like, 8 grams of sugar.
Sweet spot.
Yeah, no pun intended, right? So, when you look at it, that's what people do. They say, oh man, this is like, and they find the sweet spot, and then they make all the cereals with that kind of level of sugar in them, right? Fat and salt in them. So
Taking advantage of our genetic survival.
our evolutionary,
Evolutionary.
blueprint.
Yeah.
Blueprint. Yeah.
Wow. I've learned so much today. I've learned that I need to go meditate and do that more because that will help so many things in my life. And I think for a lot of people. So I'm so grateful to learn so much today and to chat with you. So thank you so much for being with us today, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure. For all the listeners, stay tuned. At the end, we're going to do some lightning questions, newly called student smoke signals. Have those right at the end of this. So as always, remember to check the Ancestral Science podcast website for our store. There's some cool t-shirts there. Indigenous Science is the OG science, as you were mentioning. All of that proceeds go towards supporting knowledge keepers and keeping the pod going. Lots of show notes there with additional links and resources. Really great for teachers. And always remember those protocols and connecting all those teachings to the people, the knowledge keepers, and the land that they're from. You can check that out at Relational Science Circle, all one word.com. Always a free way to support the pod is to follow, like, share, and rate. It's all very much appreciated. As always, thank you to support from Indigenous Screen Office and Story Hive. Thanks, Emil Starlight of Limelight Media, Multimedia for editing, and marketing and podcast support from Alex Flett. So, hand to heart, Michael, for your time and your wisdom and that guided meditation, which I really need, and all your wisdom here today. So, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, ready for some Studis smoke signals lightning round questions?
Let me have them.
Okay. What is your favorite Indigenous author, movie, or TV show?
I'd have to say my favorite author probably was Vine Deloria Jr. I enjoyed his work a lot.
Yeah, there's a spirit and science in the metaphysics one.
Yep.
So good.
Got some classics.
Yeah. What's your favorite holiday food?
Favorite holiday food? Probably something with nuts.
Oh,
Yeah. Something made out of nuts or something with nuts. Yeah.
like it. Where's your favorite place to meditate?
Right now it's in my garage, and my garage I converted during the pandemic. Otherwise, it's usually outside. So usually outside, you like to sit by the water and meditate.
The sounds of the water. Yeah. What star constellation do you most connect with?
I think the Milky Way.
Mm.
My father's name was Skitsadanu, which means wolf trail, and the wolf trail, my father told me, meant that's where his name came from, where the Milky Way was. The wolf came down from the Milky Way to Mother Earth to help the people, to guide the
Mhm.
people and to help the people build the earth. So that's my dad's name, Skitsadanu, and that's the one I kind of really relate to. So,
Similar story in Blackfoot
oh,
with
really?
the
Okay.
Wolf Trail, Milky Way, Makoi Yoksakoi.
Oh, okay. All right.
Ah, cool.
Yeah.
Sweet or savory?
Oh, I'm more savory. More
With
savory.
the super tasting fat
Yeah.
gene.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
uh,
yeah. Yeah. Sugar is not really my thing. So
I like gummy bears. Who's your biggest inspiration?
my what?
Your biggest inspiration?
Gosh, so many. It's hard to say. I think, you know, she's. I don't know. I've just been impressed by, I don't know, maybe the things that the Incas and the Mayans did. I think with science and what they did with math, what they did with, with philosophy and so on. I think about that, and how they're, uh, Aztecs too, their influence in the world, how they influenced the world with their math and science and their literature and their philosophy and their astronomy and those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Uh, I think about historically that those are the folks I really, kind of resonate with. So
That's a good answer. Last question. Where will Indigenous people be 1,000 years from now?
I think in another planetary system. I think
Oh,
AI, and I think the way we're moving now with humans is that we're going to be colonizing other parts of our solar system very soon.
mhm.
I think within the next 50 years there'll be a colony on the moon, and maybe there'll be a colony on Mars, or the closest livable planets like Earth. People will be there within maybe the next 200 years. In 1,000 years, we could be probably extending people outside of our known solar system, and the first indigenous people will be, I'm not sure who will be out there, but could be
Mm.
that folks will be out there. In between that, there'll be a lot of lessons learned. I think a lot of growth, a lot of transformation. I'm not even sure what indigenous people look like or what they will be considered 1,000 years from now. Uh,
Hmm.
it's an interesting question. So
Hmm. Well, thank you so much. This has been an enlightening conversation for me. Thank you.
thank you.